Hello everyone, happy Halloween. So like many other termly online masochists, I enjoy games that scare the shit out of me. A few months ago I got this not unknown but clearly indie horror game called Detention. Detention was released in 2017 by Red Candle Games, a Taiwanese game developer whose only other notable work is Devotion, a game primarily known for pissing off the Chinese government. I remember falling in love with the art style after seeing it on Steam, and so I said, you know what? Why not? I don't intend to diminish the importance or significance of other games of this genre, but Detention really is one of a kind that I've wanted to review for ages. In fact, it was meant to be the first video on this channel, but you know, it wasn't. It's very rare a game can leave me scared while playing it without the anticipation of cheap jump scares, loud noises, or shock value. Though about that last one, I can assure you this game doesn't exactly shy away from shocking imagery. Detention is set in 1960s Taiwan, a period known as the White Terror. The White Terror was a period of extreme political repression under the Kuomintang, also known as the Chinese Nationalist Party. Detention follows a high schooler slowly unravelling their past life, within the context of a twisted, quite literally otherworldly rendition of their school, full of monsters, spirits, and as priorly mentioned, explicit, visceral imagery. It's akin to the film Memento in the way it's structured, if you've seen that, even if it does it in a very different way. Detention uses a series of clues through the notes you collect as you traverse through the game to allure to the next step, in order to unravel the mystery of the life that the main character led before. The cherry on top of all of it is the inclusion of Taiwanese culture and East Asian folklore, that not only serve as a decent backdrop to heighten up the horror experience, but represent things in themselves in very clever ways. Detention utilises numerous heavy themes such as trauma, repression, fear, isolation, and most importantly, guilt and redemption, to craft a beautiful, atmospheric, haunting experience that I believe treads a fine line between sugarcoating and exploitation, avoiding either extreme with subtle storytelling that can be described as artistry. As stated before, this game is certainly not off the radar. It's quite well known within the indie horror community and is widely agreed upon to be a masterpiece. While I more so view the content with an outsider's perspective, I know for a fact that this game is connected with many people on a personal level, because it's able to portray such a difficult subject matter with a relatable framing device. Just before we get into it, I should issue some trigger warnings for anyone watching the video. While the game focuses more on implication with its complex themes, they are definitely not for the faint of heart. So real quick, suicide, self-harm, political repression, psychological trauma, and as mentioned twice before, unsettling imagery. If you're all fine with that, then we're good to go. While I hope to try and do the game justice in this video, I'm by no means someone who is educated enough to comment on the real events in which the story is set. However, I am going to be talking about it briefly and hopefully respectfully, so I can give a bit of background for my personal interpretations. I've linked some stuff down below for anyone who wants to learn more about it. Also, I'd like to remind you beforehand to subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment. It really helps my tiny little channel grow into a bigger one and signifies to me that you're up for seconds. Without further ado, welcome to Detention, a game that isn't just an example of psychological horror at its finest, but also a story that perfectly mixes the mystique of East Asian mythology with the darkness of real-world events that took place. The game begins with a student named Wei Chang-ting struggling to stay awake, as a somewhat unnerving figure, named Instructor Bai, is approaching to ask the teacher Miss Yin of a list. We don't know what the list is actually of yet, but we'll come to find that later on. Wei continues having his snooze until he suddenly wakes up, finding himself in the midst of a typhoon. The music and lighting here are really foreboding. Something feels off immediately, and you can tell off the bat that this isn't your normal typhoon. There's something much more sinister being alluded to. You pick up your first item, titled "Where Did Miss Yin Go?", which alludes to the disappearance of that very same teacher, Miss Yin. Wei then decides that he should head home. We're introduced to a few game mechanics along the way, such as the notebook for guides and notes, as well as the rough layout of his school. As this is a point and click, you're encouraged to sort of play around with everything and to experiment rather than follow a strict progression. While a lot of these things are seemingly innocuous, there is one note that is particularly important. A public announcement that is encouraging students to rat out pro-communists, or those that they feel may be treacherous to the state, non-patriotic, etc., with big rewards for informants. It goes to show you that even an environment like a school meant to look after students and make them feel safe can become a political war zone, with adults of authority taking advantage of even children to spread their messages. He makes his way outside of the main building and decides to go through the auditorium to go to the main entrance. This area is noticeably more chilling than the previous, with desaturated, drowned out visuals, and the sound of the howling wind overwhelming everything else within the scene. Upon entering the auditorium, he finds a girl passed out in a chair. He makes his way over to wake the girl, who seems to not really know where she is. Like Wei, she doesn't seem that alarmed, but what really sets her off is that she doesn't have a necklace. In fact, she's so concerned about it that she refuses to leave with you unless you find it for her. Like, there's literally a biblical fucking storm on the way and you're worried about a necklace? Okay. With that is our first real puzzle though. This game's puzzles are quite straightforward. I mean, with this one you just have to peer into a fan and fetch a necklace with an umbrella. By the way, if you played the game you'll already know, but if you haven't, almost all of the stuff I'll be mentioning has a deep underlying meaning or greater symbolism. So I'm just going to focus on the main ones. I'll still mostly allow you to pick up the pieces for yourself though. I believe that the pendant symbolises the girl's connection to her past, and that being unable to leave without it represents the need to rediscover what happened before. Anyways, that's all I'll say for now. They make their way down the hill to the school's entrance, but they find something they don't expect at all. The bridge has collapsed and there's a very red river in its place. Rivers in East Asian mythology are often believed to be inhabited by deities or spirits, and the distinctive colour of this one suggests it may be the Sanzu River, or the River of Three Crossings. I should note that the Sanzu River is a concept in Japanese Buddhism, not Taoism, which is the religion of detention, but my guess is that they were trying to incorporate broader aspects of neighbouring cultures. It generally represents the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the afterlife, with the Three Crossings name symbolising paths one can take determined by their life choices. I think in the context of detention it represents the incoming transition of the game from the real world to something more supernatural, as well as a metaphorical barrier, perhaps tying in with the game's themes of guilt and later redemption, but I'm getting ahead of myself. They decide to go back to the school to have a little sleepover, and have a little introductory session to boot. The girl introduces herself as 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐸, or simply just Ray, and Wei returns the greeting. They try to settle in for a chat, but obviously it's of course a bit awkward, but understandable. Instructor Bai is once again brought up, and we learn that this guy is clearly not a good one at all. Like, imagine a teacher that really sucked, but 1,000 times worse. They think of a plan in the meantime for Wei to go down to the principal's office and call for some help. Most people probably wouldn't split up at a time like this just in case something happens on the way. Like, I don't know, the typhoon? But they of course haven't watched enough Scooby-Doo to realise this is wrong, and Wei goes through with it anyway, leaving Ray on her own. And little did he know, that would be the last time she saw him. Alive. After a nightmarish sequence of visuals that don't make a lot of sense, but like with much of the game so far you'll come to understand, Ray wakes up in the auditorium. However, this time, she's the only one alive. Yes, Wei is dead. We have no idea how, but he is. He's hanging upside down with no apparent cause of death, so we can only assume he's been through hell and back, perhaps quite literally. All we know is someone, or rather something, definitely did this to him. You don't get lacerations like that from a tropical cyclone. Something you'll notice is that the school has gone dark, perhaps alluring to the limited understanding that Ray has at this point in time, much like how the people of Taiwan were kept in the dark about the true extent of their government's oppressive action. This leads Ray to take a candle to light her way as she tries to figure out what the hell is going on. She enters the room to the left, and funnily enough there's a dead rat and a note exactly where her pendant was placed. A note about a book club. The so-called book club, as you'll come to find, spoiler alert, is basically a club for smuggling in restricted media, as obviously during a period like the White Terror a lot of stuff was prohibited. It was essentially a club that went directly against the law, a club that Wei was a member of. In fact, actually, while we're on it, let's dive into the White Terror just briefly for some people who are unaware. The White Terror, as mentioned in the intro, was a period of extreme political repression by the Kuomintang. During the time in which the game takes place, the Nationalist Party of China, the Kuomintang, had fled to the little island of Taiwan. This was because the Communist Party of China during the Chinese Civil War found a power vacuum in 1949 post-World War II. They then took advantage of it and gained control of the entire country. What followed in Taiwan was a period of propaganda, censorship, and a need to maintain the status quo of a nationalistic, anti-communist state. As a result, almost all media was restricted, imports had strict controls placed upon them, and people found to be traitors or in possession of contraband faced imprisonment, torture, or even execution. So yeah, absolutely horrible stuff. All of this was imposed by the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party. For people unfamiliar, that's gonna sound confusing, but long story short, Taiwan still claims the entirety of what most would consider China for itself, and it considers itself the Republic of China. Whereas China as we know it now is considered the People's Republic of China. There's this whole thing about a one China policy that I could go on about all day, but it basically states that countries in the world can only recognise Taiwan, the Republic of China, or China as we know it, the People's Republic of China, not both. And of course, most of the world supports the latter, as of now. We gain a new ability to silence our breathing, which is the main defensive mechanic in the game. It hides you from the passing spirits, known as the Lingered, who are really damn creepy. Ray makes her way back to the main building where immediately there's the sound of a ringing phone. Perhaps the call for help was returned. However, when Ray goes to pick it up, well, at least there's one thing we got from it. She needs to get to the damn counsellor's office. We also find an altar. This serves as a way to save the game's progress as you go. It's simple and really well integrated into the game, so you never have to worry about losing your position. You find that the way to the counsellor's office is locked with some sort of code on the gate. We also come into a whole bunch of items and notes that all alert to one thing that has already been building. Closed doors that aren't even locked, a message to let you know that you're on your own, a lonely flower, a ghost in the darkness, a seemingly innocent quote that intends to be uplifting, Ray looking into her own reflection. It all symbolises a need to reconnect with the past. As Ray rightly says, forgotten or just too afraid to remember. We get a new item, a fence cutter, as well as a single die. Ray uses the fence cutter to get through to the hospital, where we get another tip of how to handle the Lingered. Food offerings. Food offerings in Taiwanese folklore are a form of connecting with spirits by showing respect, and maintaining harmony with the spirit realm, keeping them at bay while you go about your business. And if you haven't figured it out already, they are clearly meant to depict the darkness of Ray's mind. I mean, come on, they're practically the same model. They're parts of her that she wishes not to confront and would rather avoid. You find a little note detailing a patient's injuries. It asks simply, how can students be injured so severely like this? However, knowing the context of the game, you can only assume it's likely the result of punishment. Punishment perhaps for holding certain beliefs. Punishment by the same individuals that killed Wei maybe. You switch on the light of an eye examination chart and you find a little key in the corner. After giving the Lingered a whole lamb meal for free, you enter into the kind of room that John Kramer would use for a trap. You then find another die and a bit of paint thinner. Soon enough, Ray uses the paint thinner to get rid of that talisman blocking the door, unlocking another chapter of her past, finds a random knife in the following room, and then enters into yet another disgusting room, only to find, what's that? Another die? My lord! She then decides to roll them, obviously, and they turn into teeth. With 3 numbers. A code. That's it, our ticket out of here. But first we need one more thing. Yeah, this is one of the more overtly disturbing and visceral parts of the game. While it is uncomfortable, it perfectly represents spilling the blood of others for your own selfish gain, the primary cause of Ray's guilt. It's simultaneously a very literal but very subtle depiction of the game's themes. It's genuinely so clever. We head back into the classroom to try and decipher those engravings on the desk. I was quite confused by this puzzle at first, but I later found that what you're supposed to do is spill the blood into the engravings, and then use your notebook to print them. It reveals a bunch of symbols representing numbers. Well, I say it's time to go unlock that door. Ray does so, and finds herself able to access somewhere she couldn't before. She enters through the doorway, only to find another altar and something else. This monster, as you'll come to find, represents something far more troubling than the Lingard or any other creature in this game. A force that makes you not only want to hide, but to run. After that, you enter into a room full of overwhelming amounts of calligraphy. You find a note in the centre, a ripped counselling record. Age, 17. Mother, housewife. Negative, troubled, attitude, late. Leisure activity encouraged. Well, this must be Ray. We transition into Ray's room, parents arguing in the background, Ray pondering in the foreground, seeming uncertain with her future. I think almost everyone who has been through school can relate to this, but what makes it uniquely sad is the emphasis on her hope, even in the face of a brutal regime. The idea that while this evil seems unending, we can pray it will end. Using a common experience of high schoolers across the developed world to convey such a powerful and important message, as well as a sensitive and indirect way to tell of how Taiwanese youth may have felt under martial law, is truly thoughtful and impressive. And to know that her own mother threw away a symbol of her hope makes my heart break even further. It not only shows a disregard for Ray's feelings on her end, but a sad truth that Ray's own mother was a symbol of her diminishing faith. Ray decides to just go to sleep, likely to just escape, to free herself, to find herself in a foreign land, to begin a new life as a stranger. Oh, how wonderful that'd be. Ray wakes up on a random chair again by a stage, this time outside with the sound of a flagpole waving in the wind. We don't see what this flag is, but flying a flag generally represents some sort of identity or pride in belief. While it's likely just coincidental as well, it's interesting that with every new chapter it presents us with a stage. You then make your way forwards down a path until you reach a new place. You find an illustration detailing the black and white impermanence. Two ancient officials who perished trying to protect one another. They were then, for their loyalty to each other, appointed as the messengers of death. Then, people who died would see them arrive to claim their souls. Of all the areas in Detention, this is my favourite visually, though story-wise I think the next area is the strongest. Ray then finds another note, this time about a lantern spectre. The lantern spectres in Taiwanese mythology are meant to be guides for spirits, helping to guide them back to their resting places. It's closely linked with honouring ancestors. Ray, however, gasps in shock every time they present themselves and is once again, as with the Lingard, determined not to be found. This again implies that she's just not ready to accept the guidance she needs. Forgotten, or just too afraid to remember? It's starting to look like the latter. It could also be that Ray holding her breath is a mark of respect for the spirits, or the act of honouring the dead. Also, I died so many times to the fucking lantern spirits, I swear to God. But at least I got to see the awesome death sequence, which while annoying on replays, not only does the usual death thing with game tips, but delivers it in a way that is in keeping with the game's style. Before leaving the floor, you find the next way to continue forwards. Like the code you had to enter before, this time you find a door with the two messengers of death awaiting items to hold. You head into a water-filled basement that appears to be some sort of dungeon. Ray notes the absence of an identity for the kneeling figures behind the bars. It goes to show how the people of Taiwan during the White Terror were stripped of their individualism and identity in favour of silencing, brainwashing and conformity. One was not allowed to be a contrarian in any way, an almost cult-like existence. Ray finds some spirit money and now she needs to find a spirit shopkeeper to find some spirit candy to spend that spirit money on. Not before being confronted by some pretty disturbing visuals of the prisoners that I assume are trying to resist their oppression. Though admittedly this does seem a bit forced for the sake of suspense and might not actually have a deeper symbolism, as it definitely looks at least a bit inspired from basic horror gaming tropes. Ray then makes her way into a room of hanging dolls, or puppets rather, as they have strings attached. You then place the spirit money into the fireplace, burn it, and then you receive a feathered fan. Interesting. You then keep exploring through an overgrown set of halls and make your way into a room with a projecting film reel that seems to run perpetually. Another symbol of the oppressive, propagated, cleaned and politicised way in which the people were living. Ray then makes her way into the actual theatre and finds a grave, with a few incense sticks. After she takes the sticks, the grave reveals a name, 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. Ray then goes back down to the dungeons where she finds a token. She now has both a token and a feathered fan. I wonder, has the game at any point clearly depicted a gate with two figures that are clearly missing something to hold, and have been shown as holding the exact two items she's just found? Nope, don't think so. Ray ventures outside, and before getting to the next building, she's greeted with a gigantic statue of the president, another symbol of just how extensive the propaganda was, and in turn, the restriction of freedom and liberty. Also, another small detail, Ray mentions that the building is Japanese built. This is quite interesting to me. Between 1895 and 1945 was a period of Japanese colonial rule over Taiwan. Post-Sino-Japanese War. Taiwan was transformed significantly through Japan's consequent infrastructure projects for it, that mainly targeted the roads, the railways and education. It's yet another small link to strict overbearing rule, and portraying Taiwan as a country that even before the White Terror was not free, and arguably they still aren't today, as they don't enjoy recognition as a full country. We find an office, but unfortunately there's a bit of barbed wire in the way, and so all we can do is keep going. The first room in the next corridor is some sort of auditorium with a birdcage in the centre, and a freakish looking doll inside, as well as a random piano. Huh. The next room is what looks to be an announcement room of sorts with an intercom and an 8-track player. Ray goes outside again and walks along a little path to find a pretty, strange scene depicted with puppets, but also a familiar one. Of course, all of the things that we've just seen make up the next puzzle. Making her way forward, she finds an 8-track tape in the tree, and of course she gots to bring it back to that 8-track player. After putting it in, there's a few channels you have to switch between, but unfortunately I didn't understand what they were saying. My guess is it's probably more propaganda, though if anyone knows, let me know in the comments. The 4th track, however, is a simple little song with a piano, one that even an untrained set of hands could play. By the way, about this 4th track, when listening to some of Detention's soundtrack when picking songs to play in the video's background, I managed to identify that this piece is actually a real song. It's called Torment of a Flower by composer Teng Yu-hsien. I'm not exactly sure why they chose this song specifically for the piano tune, but I saw an interesting bit of information on Wikipedia that during the Second World War, the Japanese tampered with the lyrics of the song to praise the Japanese rule over Taiwan. Perhaps its inclusion is another mark of oppression or the forcing of a regime. Ray makes her way back to the doll cage room and plays a tune. Unfortunately though, I was a complete idiot and this stage of the puzzle took way too fucking long because I kept forgetting the tune. Yeah, I'm definitely not the musical type. After finally getting it, the birdcage unlocks and Ray takes the little doll. And after taking it, a nasty hand pops up like it just watched The Thing and gave its own interpretation. She takes it all the way to that familiar scene and places it in the hand on the left. Still gotta feel the right one though. Ray has a wander into another room with a phone and a key to the roof. Ray heads up to the roof where she finds herself, but before she can approach herself she runs off. Obviously Ray follows and then her mirror image falls off the balcony. She finds a bloodstained roll of film and she's of course been left with a bad taste in her mouth after watching Joker Folie à Deux, so you know she's gonna get out the popcorn. She puts the reel in and heads into the cinema. On the cinema screen is a set of numbers, 025 121. I couldn't figure out what this number actually means, even though at first I thought it might be some sort of date. So maybe it was just random and doesn't really matter. She makes her way to the phone and punches the number in. Because I'm Gen Z, I legitimately had to search how to do this puzzle because I didn't know how to use one of these things. Embarrassing, I know. After calling the number, the person over the phone congratulates Ray, stating that her country appreciates her assistance. Assistance with what? They then presumably hang up. She's on her own. A very disturbing presence then overcomes the room. Ray gasps in fear, crouches on the floor and covers her ears. A loud, monstrous thudding starts making its way up the corridor. It's that thing again. The thing unlike any of the others. It tries to get in, rattling the door handle violently and trying to force it open. This monster is clearly the one that Ray is most afraid of, by miles. With the others, she's comfortable with just holding her breath, but with this one, she's afraid of even being seen. I think it's probably clear to you now who this monster is meant to be. The big bad of Ray's school. Instructor Bai. Outside is something a little new, a military police puppet. The final component to the scene depicted outside. She makes her way to it and places the puppet in the right hand. The military puppet then proceeds to shoot the upside down puppet, blowing its brains out, splattering blood all over the left puppet. I've been trying to keep it subtle, but I no longer can. Obviously, these puppets are a very important symbolism. The puppet in the center is Wei, a member of the book club. The puppet from the cage is Ray. The puppet left by the horrific monster, a militaristic figure, Instructor Bai. Essentially, Bai shoots Wei Ray, but the blood is on Ray. Now we know for a fact that Ray may have had a hand in Wei's fate. She did something. She just can't remember what. We then get a key to that locked door in the basement that we saw way back when. Ray proceeds to unlock this door and head down the corridor, which triggers a cutscene. We observe a conversation between Wei and Ray in his classroom. She thanks Wei for giving her a reading book list from the club, a highly confidential reading book list. They both seem clearly a bit on edge about the meetings they've been having. This shows how their mindsets differ. Wei is the one wanting to protect freedom of speech and expression, and is under the assumption that Ray is too, with her comments on how they should have their own freedom to pursue knowledge. Ray, however, is more worried about herself. Worried about what others will think, or who they will tell. Wei showers her with compliments, even comparing her to Miss Yin, leader of the book club. She seems surprised to be compared to Miss Yin. Ray is concerned with comparison to Miss Yin, whereas Wei is concerned with telling Ray that Miss Yin respects her. But of course, as with anyone who's gone through insecurities and comparison, you don't believe them for 2 minutes. Wei then cites a quote, that same innocent quote we found in the first chapter, "Strengthen thy wings, sky's the limit," a quote now confirmed to be of Miss Yin herself. The quote is considered to be motivational, one that encourages a growth mindset, resilience. Hearing it again now seems to reinforce that Ray is growing and overcoming something. She's rediscovering what happened, her past. But she's maybe not quite there yet. Ray goes on to inquire a bit about Miss Yin and her relationship with another individual, Mr. Chiang. The cutscene then ends abruptly without an answer to the question. Ray walks into the classroom, finding a little something on the desk, the reading list she was given by Wei, or rather, a gun. By this point, I think you know exactly what's happened. Ray sold the book club out to instruct to buy. The gun also has a description. With proper use, I could use this unassuming list to practically destroy those in my way. She makes her way between that barbed wire wall into the office that she couldn't access earlier. The next room is one full of mirrors, reflections of herself. The music fades out, her footsteps dominating the soundscape. She then finds a woman tied to a chair. This scene is about to get very uncomfortable, very fast. In the reflection, there's a bag over her head, but the person in question is Miss Yin. Ray is shocked to find her here and confronts her, with Miss Yin responding that as a teacher, she shows concern for students she finds rebellious, and then says, "Remember what you did." Ray still doesn't understand. Has she forgotten? Or does she just not want to remember? It slowly starts to unravel. Just a harmless piece of paper, right? Instead, I had to die. He had to die. And many other students had to die. Ray, in a moment of fear and panic, freaks out, blaming Miss Yin. She's scared of her. Miss Yin then says that sometimes when one trips up, they're never able to get back up again. Now, Ray is not scared. She's enraged. Miss Yin then sees her moment of fragility and simply states that if Ray had a problem, why didn't she just come and talk to her? This clearly hits a nerve and Ray doesn't know what to think. But then, in this amazing visual, her reflection diverts from herself. While she cowers, overwhelmed by her emotions, her reflection stands with confidence, raising the gun and in a blinded moment of rage, takes the shot. With the mirrors around her broken, she once again puts the blame for her troubles on Miss Yin. Ray continues forward and finds herself in a room of massive scale, with a distant figure. This figure is Justice Chung Huang. The city god is believed to be responsible for the protection of cities, towns and villages, communities of people, ensuring moral order and overseeing punishment for those who do wrong, both living and dead. Ray believes it to be a waste of time, but for once decides to ask. She asks 3 questions in silent prayer. Ray asks, "Will I be able to live a simple life with loved ones and family?" She gets the crying answer, "Do not seek what cannot be." Ray then asks her second question, "Will my parents who quarrel and fight have a second chance together?" The laughing answer, "You cannot cry over spilt milk." Ray then asks her third question, "Will I be able to live life by my choices and follow my heart down my own path?" The laughing answer, "Ray can only face reality obediently." Ray follows it up with a final question, "Do I ask for too much? Is life just a never-ending bitterness, or is it all just me?" The divine answer, "It's because of her." Ray finds herself in a hall with a radio. You then are able to adjust the radio to wherever the music sounds most clear. After adjusting the radio to this relatively calming and nostalgic music, Ray wakes up in her room. She then notices that someone is home and so decides to leave her room to go check it out. The atmosphere then immediately changes. The warm atmosphere of her room is now grey, discomforting, the sound of a woman crying. Ray's mother. She details how her mother is somewhat of a traditional housewife, never disagreeing with her husband even when he's wrong. She then reminisces over the days where her father would only drink at New Year's, making jokes and stories instead of arguments. Ray walks into the back where she finds 3 portraits of her father, her mother, and herself. There's a light switch to the left of the room and so you make your way over to it. Upon flicking it, there's some purple lines that appear to represent angles of some sort, and the door is also locked. But with a quote, "Meet the right person at the right time." Upon viewing her portrait within the darkness, the eyes begin to drip this neon pink liquid, giving Ray a little bit of Dutch courage. No, I'm kidding, obviously. Please drink responsibly. Ray then goes back into the main room, which starts going fucking haywire, but paranormal activity is totally normal and so she just keeps on forward. My guess is that this is either figuratively symbolising the chaos of her home, or literally symbolising the altercations her parents got into. We go back to that radio and adjust it again, now with a somewhat more joyous song, but still old-timey. In this reality, her furniture is all upside down, with her piggy bank smashed on the floor. She heads out the room again, only to find a selection of doors that all seem to lead to nothing. Until she spills her Ribena into that puddle over there. You turn the lights off again and this time there's a trail leading to the middle door, and then the 4th door, and then the far right door, and then the far left. I think you get it. After entering through the final door, you find a hallway with some syringes. Ray heads forwards only to find a note on the floor. An ad for a private investigator that prides itself on tracking people and finding cheating husbands. This seems to imply that Ray's father had a big heart. In fact, his heart was so big that he gave it to another woman. Oh yeah, the next room is really creepy, with a massive visual of her parents lying in bed. Ray thinks back on how she used to hear her parents chatting through the wall, until one day it just turned into deafening silence. The sad reality is that a lot of relationships, due to many circumstances, just fade and get weaker over time. And when a kid is involved, it's extra difficult. It has an undeniable effect on them. It then seems to take a darker turn, where Ray begins to talk about the alcoholism of her father, abusive, drunk out of his mind husband, wife who was scared to speak up, vulnerable teenager caught in the middle. The next room features 3 clocks, and interestingly they're in a parallel lineup to the portraits. And remember those angles from earlier? Oddly, they look pretty similar to the clock hands now that I think of it. After solving the puzzle, you head back into the parents' room. It now feels a lot more uncomfortable, with the giggling of a woman in the background. Ray recites how when helping her father there was the stench of smoke but also of powdered makeup. It's not very subtle here as to what's going on. I think you can piece it together. Up the corridor is another door, this time leading to what I can only assume is the teacher's office. Ray heads back to the radio and then adjusts back to the original setting. She heads into the back where the portraits adjust themselves and turn the room red. The door on the left then lights up blue. Heading through it, we're given this cotton candy-like forest, which is very much different from any other setting in the game. Walking forward triggers a cutscene where a male figure is talking to Ray. He seems concerned for Ray's troubles at home, talking about her naivety and innocence. The dialogue here is very interesting. On the surface, it seems like a teacher concerned for his student, but there's definitely an underlying tone of manipulation. You can just feel it, but it's not easy to prove. He invites Ray to take a stroll down the boulevard at the weekend to have a talk. It then abruptly ends, a lot like the talk that Wei and Ray had earlier, missing knowledge. She then picks up a paper plane left on the table. On the way back, we find a new radio station has been launched, 103. Upon changing to it, the atmosphere is different once more. This time it's somewhat organised but still haphazard, with slightly more eerie but still joyful music. Halfway between the first and the second. On the other side of the door this time is a set of mirrors showing reflections. This puzzle is my favourite in the entire game. It is quite simple, but I think it's the perfect culmination of all of this quote unquote light play that we've seen so far. like with the spilling of the drink, or rather what's to come in the next chapter. After passing the puzzle, there are a few seemingly normal household rooms, but depicted with really unsettling music and a degree of darkness. I really love how this game is able to make seemingly normal places feel like they're right out of a fever dream. Like really, it's probably the single strongest element apart from the story itself. In the next room is a ticket booth, but of course for a ticket booth you gotta have the ticket itself. Ray finds a random coin, and of course if she wants that ticket, she better start up that savings account as soon as possible. She puts it in the piggy bank, which of course does nothing, but upon changing the frequency to the smashed piggy bank room, there's a little ticket in its place. For a movie. We change back the radio yet again to the cinema setting. The way is no longer dark and depressing, it's vibrant, colourful and exciting, full of media, entertainment, etc. These are all things that would have been restricted during the White Terror for sure, and so perhaps the metaphorical cinema represents being able to access all of these things you had been forced to repress. It's a deliberate and effective contrast to the more depressive and gloomy atmosphere of Detention. She presents her ticket and then heads into the theatre. This begins a cutscene. We see Ray sitting alone watching the movie. The male figure from earlier then appears next to her. The atmosphere then turns a more vibrant, almost romantic pink. Ray then leans in, and most concerningly, he doesn't push her off. In fact, he leans into her as well. This basically all but confirms that Ray, who is a teenager, had some sort of intimate relationship with this teacher individual. The movie then ends and it's back to a depressive grey. This scene makes me feel deeply uncomfortable in particular, because while it's not overtly disturbing or alluring to something gruesome, it's showcasing such a pure, unfiltered case of manipulation from an authority figure, but also a really sad case of having nobody else to turn to. My guess is that Ray only feels this way because she has no one, and more importantly, is particularly vulnerable to being taken advantage of due to the circumstances of the White Terror and her unique level of isolation. I will always have it out for people who do this kind of thing. Always. Going right to the end of the corridor from her room is now a black and white forest, a darker one, with occasional spats of red. There's a fuzzy and broken sound source at the end of it that appears to be the silhouette of this teacher. After it fades in, the teacher, or rather, the counsellor, is ending their sessions, ushering Ray to return to class. On the desk are some counselling records which say, "It's over. No matter what's been written on here, there is only farewell." Clearly this piece of shit realised what he was doing and is now attempting to back out. Ray goes back to her room, but instead of her room she finds herself back at the radio, with an open curtain. The next room is one with quite contemplative music, almost sad. What's going to follow is a set of poetic lines, cutscenes and realisations. I'll do my best to summarise them for you as well as give my own thoughts. This, in my opinion, is the single best set of moments in the game. Ray essentially follows the complete, unflinchingly honest story of her past. After gifting over the paper plane, she uncovers the first part of her story. Torn apart by her father's alcoholism and her mother's reluctance to help her, she found it hard to get to sleep and even harder to wake. The same cycle of anguish and internal pain every single day. She didn't just feel a loss of happiness, but a loss of identity. She wasn't just isolated, she was disassociated. The spirit of her past then changes position. After gifting the spirit her pendant, she learns the second part to her story. Here, I believe she talks of her relationship with the priorly mentioned counsellor, sort of longing for it to return. Her only sense of place and identity was in this person, who was knowingly manipulating someone vulnerable. The white jade deer pendant is said to protect the miserable and alone, or for the miserable and alone rather, to feel that they're protected. The spirit of her past then moves once more and Ray gifts the final item, her counselling record. She then rediscovers the pain and abandonment she felt as the counsellor distanced himself from her. She wasn't just in love with him, she depended on him. She was absolutely distraught. This man made his victim think that he was all she had left, and he brutally crushed it to save himself. The room then disappears, a cracked open door appearing in its stead. Ray walks up to it, triggering a cutscene between 𝐕𝐢𝐼𝐸 and another individual, Mr. Chiang. She angrily confronts him about his relationship with Ray. He justifies it to himself, saying that she knew well enough what she wanted, referring to Ray, justifying the fact that he had controlled the narrative and pulled her inwards, playing and toying with her mind and emotions. 𝐕𝐢𝐼𝐸 is clearly concerned and empathetic. She realises it's wrong. But even in the face of this, Mr. Chiang ignores her. He rationalises everything and refuses to admit he's done anything wrong. And we all know he definitely has. However, 𝐕𝐢𝐝 then says something that changes the narrative entirely. Did you forget about us? It's now clear, at least to Ray, that it's not about what's good for Ray, it's about what's good for 𝐕𝐢𝐝. We now know everything. We already found out what she did. She sold out the book club. But now we know why. She saw 𝐕𝐢𝐝 as the end to her relationship. The one thing she actually cared about. The one thing that actually gave her a reason to keep on going. And as a result, she wanted to ruin her. Regardless of whoever else stood in her way. Now that we know the true extent, the game is coming to a close. This chapter is going to be particularly hard to cover because it's highly choice based and mostly involves just switching between the shadow version of yourself and reality to complete different puzzles. Essentially, I'll do it like this. I'll cover each of the cutscenes consecutively, piecing together the story as we go. Then I will outline both endings separately. Cool. An old man approaches a chair in a vandalized stage area before walking away. Ray wakes up in that same chair, just barely missing him. She heads into the room to the left and hears someone crying in the background once again. There she is confronted with a shadow version of herself. The shadow states, "Our life would vanish, but not our guilt. I am you, yet you are not me. It's the sin that makes you linger in this realm." And with this, it tells us our second to last big reveal. Ray is dead. And has been this whole time. Our last big question and reveal is of course, how? Ray switches into the shadow version of herself and wanders around, until the first of a few cutscenes. This cutscene shows a typical day within the book club, with emphasis on not mentioning the book club to anyone else as a moral duty, to protect others and yourself. She then addresses Wei, who states that he had already given the book list to Mr. Chiang. Familiar name, isn't it? Now we know how Ray got a hold of the metaphorical gun, Mr. Chiang's involvement with Ray. 𝐕𝐲𝐝 states that soon the book club may come to an end, which of course it did. Wei asks student to teacher quite plainly, 𝐕𝐲𝐝, why are things like this? And well, simply, it's out of her power. When something as horrible as the White Terror overtakes your life, nobody has power. Nobody except the wrongful people in charge. After the cutscene, we find a note. The note details that 𝐕𝐲𝐝 was a wanted political fugitive. Luckily, she was able to evade arrest and left the country only to be blacklisted. She travelled the world fighting for human rights and freedom of expression, but unfortunately died at 50. Her last wish was to be able to return home. And well, with the lifting of martial law, that wish can be fulfilled. And so ends the story of 𝐕𝐲𝐝. On the way to the next cutscene, I notice a lot of glitched versions of Ray's past self. It indicates that this is a never-ending loop of guilt. Once again, I'll state that quote, forgotten or just too afraid to remember. And now, she finally has the chance to try and beat it, to redeem herself, once and for all. The next cutscene we find after some more body swap activities. It's one where Wei and another student are burning their books. They make sure to be extremely precise, burning spirit money to quote-unquote throw them off, and having to burn every single fragment. This just goes to show you the real extent of bad martial law imposed upon these literal teenagers. Nobody should have to be this worried for their own skin before they even turn 18, or even after. They talk about 𝐕𝐲𝐝 and how she escaped, and then the other boy asks Wei if he's frightened as well, because they don't have the same connections to be able to escape the country, feeling at the mercy of their government if they were to be caught, God forbid. He also asks Wei if he knows how the reading list got leaked. Wei states that he's clueless, but I think we know that he's not being genuine here. He likely blames Mr. Chiang, but also to a massive extent himself, as guardian of the information. It shows that Ray's actions really caused deep-cut wounds in everyone involved, and that what she did caused guilt to be felt in others as well as herself. I'm not sure if Wei actually knows that Ray did it, but regardless, it's very, very sad. The cutscene then fades out and there's another one of those notes. This time, a written verdict from court. Mr. Chiang, Wei, and the others were all found guilty of collusion with communist forces. Wei was placed behind bars for 15 years, and Mr. Chiang was executed. And so ends the story of Mr. Chiang and Wei Cheng-ting. Ray walks in on that old man from earlier playing Torment of a Flower on the piano. Once she approaches, he fades away, however. Another note is left in the core of the auditorium. It says, "That time in fear, forcing herself to breed hatred. Who knew that she would take that leap and leave this world behind? Nary a last word. Because of fear? Remorse? The reason remains undecided. My loved ones and teacher went to a higher place. She was buried in an unmarked grave, leaving me a decrepit man. And with that, our last question is answered. We know Ray's cause of death. She killed herself. She killed herself because of the overwhelming guilt she felt over what she did." The next cutscene is the final stop on the roller coaster. It's the thing we know she did, in writing. The moment Ray sold out the book club to instruct to buy. Your country appreciates your assistance. After that, Ray heads up to the roof. And with that, we're greeted with one final unifying scene before the plots diverge. The old man smoking a cigarette, and that's all. From there are obviously two endings. Let's cover the normal ending first. The normal ending is quite simple really. Ray fails to accept her guilt and walks into a hellscape, the river Sanzu. She's shamed by those she screwed over and then approaches a stage. Her shadow presents her with a noose, and all she can do now is let the noose do what a noose is meant to do. This ending is quite dark, and I don't think it's the right ending for how far Ray has come in realising what she's done. It symbolises repeating the story all over again. The other ending is considered by even the game itself the true ending. So let's cover that now. The true ending differs in that instead of Ray learning how to tie a noose, we instead experience the moment Mr. Chiang is arrested in quite a brutal and direct way. We then see a cutscene of Mr. Chiang thinking over his life. Despite Mr. Chiang's actions, his stupidity and his manipulation, I find myself truly being able to agree with him. Freedom of belief, love and self-realization should be cherished when of moral standing. It's exceptionally important that all humans are entitled to this. After stating that the world wasn't ready for them, Mr. Chiang fades away. It's discomforting to know that he still seems to have feelings for Ray, but this scene does hit the feels a bit from Ray's perspective. While what she did was wrong, this scene got me thinking. She was just a teenager herself, but she never got to see what she could have become. She never saw the light at the end of the White Terror tunnel. She never got to experience a real relationship, one not based on power dynamics. She never got to simply just be or grow old. She's now a ghost, stuck as what she was, never having had true resounding satisfaction in her life. We then get our first set of quotes with a vocal performance.
白水先染上一河鲜血，只能如铁锈般凋零。
Following them is a very heartfelt set of scenes. We see the old man from before walking up the hill towards the school in which he used to go. And yes, the old man is Wei Cheng-ting in the flesh. A free man, now in an era without restriction, or the horrors of the White Terror. The colours are vibrant, inviting, and symbolise the hope of the now free people. Wei walks through the vandalised auditorium and up into the main building. He walks to his old classroom, a place he hadn't visited for many years. He then takes a seat at his old desk. And so ends the story of 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐿. All in all, a fantastic game. Truly one of the best experiences I've ever had. I've replayed it, I believe, 3 times since I first played it last year, and I barely ever replay single player games, especially horrors. Even as someone who's never been through such turmoil, I truly relate to Ray and her struggles of guilt, and the need to find that redemption. And I think the most beautiful part of this story is that everyone can relate to this. It's a common lesson in life and perhaps the single most important lesson to learn. And that is, when it comes to your menial guilt for things you did in the past, you should always have the chance to redeem yourself and come back from it. It's a complex moral issue when it comes to dictators or those who commit murder, genocide, child abuse or terrorism. But in the case of most people who lead a normal, healthy life, or even an unhealthy one, doing the wrong thing is human. Making mistakes is human. And mistakes don't have to be innocent, they can be malicious as well. And so redemption from it, or simply just forgiveness from others, is crucial for a tolerant and cohesive society. I'll end it off on this. If you are interested in horror games to any extent, but don't want the generic jump scares, gore, or shock horror, I'd strongly recommend Detention. An ethereal, immersive experience that leaves you with a lot to think about and a changed perspective on what horror gaming can achieve. If you made it to this point, I'd just like to thank you for your support, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. This is my first proper video essay I've ever made, and so I hope it's received positively, but also met with constructive criticism, of course. I'd like to ask you one last time if you would subscribe, leave a like, or drop me a comment. It gives me a lot of confidence in my channel's future and my own ability to create content such as this, so go for it. With all of that said, I'm 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿, and I guess for now,
Goodbye!